Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining another episode of the Educational Leadership Podcast. We have another very special guest. Before we introduce our guest, we want to give a shout out to our sponsor, Ideal Impact. Ideal Impact is giving funding to school districts around the great state of Texas, hundreds of millions of dollars. Doesn't involve taxpayers, doesn't involve the government, and there's no out-of-pocket to the district. So reach out to Ideal Impact if your district needs funding. And now, let's jump into today's podcast. Before we introduce our guest, we'll introduce our co-host, Corinne French.
Hey, everyone. I'm so glad to be here. We have a very special guest, the Superintendent of the Year for the state of Texas. Oh my gosh, what an absolute pleasure to be with you, Dr. Ott.
Thank you. I'm truly blessed and fortunate and grateful.
Yes, we're so excited to have you on here. And just, if you can, obviously you have a very unique background that brought you to Superintendent of the Year. If you can, just share a little bit about your background.
Personal or professional? Which one would you want to hear?
Both.
Whichever, yeah, both. Yeah, sprinkle in a little bit of both.
I will. I'll start with the easier one to talk about, and that's the professional piece. Professionally, I've worked in many different size school districts. I've worked in multi-high school, large school districts like Round Rock ISD, Killeen ISD. I've worked in very small rural school district, Anson Independent School District, 20 miles north of Abilene. And then I've worked in mid-size like Copperas Cove and Temple. Had a chance to serve at the Texas Education Agency for 3.5 years, and also the University of Texas system. And one would argue those are probably two of the largest bureaucracies in education in Texas. But I learned a lot in those experiences. And so those would be my professional experiences. I would say it's given me a lot of pitches to see. I tell people it's not about how many home runs you hit, it's about having a high batting average. So as many pitches as you can see, you gain the experience of maybe, making the right decisions more times than not. Personally, a little bit different story. I was born in Killeen, actually, and grew up in Copperas Cove. It's probably more the norm now than it was back then, but had a very disjointed childhood growing up. My mother moved to California, and my father was incarcerated, and it left me, by myself in Copperas Cove. And I was told, you can find a place to stay, and you can stay in Copperas Cove, or you can move out to California. And I had actually formed a level of stability through the school system growing up. And so I wanted to stay. And I was fortunate enough to be taken in by an educator and then a family, and I was able to graduate Copperas Cove, and then I went on to college. So for me, I never really knew the details of what educators did besides the idea of a teacher. But for me, I just knew I wanted to be one of those because what they were able to do for me. And I wanted to do that in some way. I wasn't sure how. I didn't have much guidance growing up, but I wanted to be able to do that for others. And so that's, I think, between the personal circumstances growing up and professional opportunities, and very thankful for people that took a chance on me and felt like I was worth maybe investing in and mentoring. I think those two things intersected somewhere and allowed me to get into administration and go from there.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I feel like before we started the podcast, Gary and I were talking about you before you popped on, because oh my gosh, it's the Superintendent of the Year. Like, this is like almost royalty in the world of education. And for those that are listening, the road to become Superintendent of the Year means that you are one of the best, because it is really hard. From personal experience, I can say I served on the committee that selects the Superintendent of the Year, and it is almost impossible to do because by the time you're there, you are among people that are all so excellent, and it's hard to ever pick one. And I'm so glad I'm no longer on that committee because it is so hard. But your personal story, what you just shared, I mean, I try so hard not to cry and get all emotional on here, but that has to impact your why. And you made that connection that because of that, what keeps you in education? So your why to get there makes so much sense. because a teacher impacted you and you stayed and you had that connection, but what keeps you there? What keeps you doing this work? Because this has been a hard couple of years.
It has been, and I think the thing that keeps me in it is the idea that you're truly making a difference in someone's life. So, when you write a letter of recommendation and a student contacts you and says, "Thanks so much, I was able to get a job and help take care of my family." When you build partnerships in the community and students have opportunities through a career tech center that allows them to serve in an assisted living home that their own grandmother's in, and they write a letter to you about it. Just trying to create opportunities, and that really keeps me going. I think that the motivator for me is just somewhere seeing where you make a difference in someone's life, and I'll continue to do this as long as I believe I'm improving something or someone. So I think that's my motivator, and we don't ever really know the battles that people are dealing with. We just don't. Some people are able to mask those better than others, and some people don't have the opportunity to mask them. And we all deal with them. I mean, us three on this call, we have things that are going on in our personal lives, and we don't ever really know what those are among one another. But I'll tell you, if you have the opportunity to add something positive to someone's life, we may not be able to change an entire world, but I'll tell you, we can sure make a small corner of it bright and shiny. And having the opportunity to do that in Temple among the families and kids, and mobilizing and marshaling resources to do that, that keeps me going.
Love it. Yeah, no, this is powerful. I mean, your story and what's led you to where you are now, and kind of your why. Just curious, right now, there's a lot of topics, right, in public education. What's one of the hot topics right now that really, you're passionate about, and you want to talk about during our 20-minute podcast here?
Sure. There are several, but I'll just kind of pick one, like a rabbit out of the hat, I guess. I think safety is top of mind for many, many people. And I think for me, the thing I'm most passionate about is not the idea of safety, because that's not a novel idea. It's really more about how it's been resourced. We being the state has really answered safety in my mind through what I call in the moment funding. Santa Fe happens, 2 months after that, there's a grant. The unfortunate tragedy of Uvalde happens, 4 months after that, there's a grant. But if it's truly something you care about and it's important, it should be funded perpetually every year. It shouldn't be, something happens, now we're going to do something about it. Because we don't treat other things like that. For example, the state assessment program and the amount of money that's poured into that every single year. If we took a third of that and put it towards safety every single year, I think school districts could work with their communities and really determine what their needs are, whether it's capital outlay or people. And the problem with grant funding, as you know, is it's soft money. So you're using it for capital outlay, one-time expenses, and people, security officers, police, they're usually the best medicine to take care of people. So I think we're fragmented there. I'm very passionate about that. I've spoken to Senator Flores about it. I've spoken to Representative Hugh Shine and Brad Buckley. In fact, they've done some face-to-face with my board members on legislative updates going into the session. And this is something we're really pushing for. And I really think it's important for our schools to be a safe place versus a soft target.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, and that's a common theme right now that we're seeing, through different conversations and interviews with different school districts. And so the funding piece of that, how do you get additional funding for these sorts of initiatives? I mean, what kind of outside the box things can districts really do?
Well, and I'm glad you asked that, because I'm not really a horn honker. I usually come with a solution. So for me, I think that it's pretty obvious with $30 billion in extra money that the comptrollers talked about, much like the excess we had in 2019 when they did a tax compression in House Bill 3. They designated funds towards increasing salaries for teachers, and rightfully so. I suspect there'll be another compression that happens this legislative session because of the amount of money that has been discussed. So there'll be an additional amount that comes from the state into the pie and reduces the local burden, hence the tax impact. And so I think that that would be a really good opportunity, because that's money that happens every year. It's in the finance formulas. And I teach school finance, so I could certainly help with this. But I think it's a great opportunity to maybe designate percentage of that towards safety. And you can even outline the topics. It could be, hardening of facilities. It could be training. It could be mental health prevention. It could be security officer. I mean, there's a lot of different directions you can go. So I think that's one way of doing it, and securing funding every year. You can also increase the per student allotment under the safety allotment designation. And so they could funnel money that way. I think either way, there's a real opportunity here, because nobody wants continued tragedies to happen. And we all want safe schools, and we do have additional funds. At least that's been communicated loud and clear by not just the comptroller's office, but the governor and other legislators.
No, I love that. And with your background on school finance, I mean, that's some very good insights right there. And I know we're running a little bit short on time. Corinne probably has a question, and I have kind of a unique question. It's going to come a little bit out of left field. So just prepare yourself for that.
I know. Well, we should tell our guests. We never really tell our guests to our listeners. We never really tell our guests exactly what we're doing. We never are here to cause any harm. It's all for fun. So
it's all for fun.
It's all for fun. No, it's all for actually. We really have this. I have my intent is that other leaders feel encouraged, and we give information. But we got a piece of information from our last host. Our last guest. Our last guest.
Wait, Chris. There's something related that I have to ask before we mention that. But
okay, I'll switch questions.
You want to ask about? Okay, we'll switch questions.
Then I'll switch questions.
I want to know, Doctor. I want to know what's going on with the girls' basketball team. That's one thing I want to know.
The girls'
Dr.
basketball.
Novotny challenged you to come on next, Dr. Novotny. And he wanted you to know something about your basketball team.
Yeah.
The girls' basketball team in Temple?
Yeah. So we had the superintendent of Ott of ISD, and he just wanted me to let you know that they did a pretty good job in girls' basketball. He just wanted me to let you know that. So that's why I asked the question about the girls' basketball.
I think, it's early in the season right now. So I don't know what he's trying to get at, but it is early in the season. But I'm a big fan of Novotny. He's a great guy. We all work very close together in Bell County, all the superintendents, and have a really close bond. It's interesting. I almost wish I was on before him, because yesterday he had to leave a Zoom meeting that we had because he had to go drive a bus. He had there was a shortage. So yes. I was having a hard time about that.
So let me switch gears with this kind of piece then, because I think one thing that I noticed over and over and over again when we hear from superintendents, and especially at the level where you are, is this humility. It exudes. I'm sure the people that interviewed you and all the other superintendents on the Superintendent of the Year committee noticed that you can't get to your level of leadership without having without having humility, and humility might mean driving a bus. And you mentioned something prior to us hitting record about students knowing you and you knowing students. Can you talk just a minute and give some inspiration to the importance of doing all the best that you can in your district to know your people, to be loved? Because that word love, I think, is so important. So will you share just a little bit with our guests and listeners about that?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I've had some people ask me about the Superintendent of the Year interview process, and I've told all of them, I said, for me, I think the thing I've learned is they're not asking questions about me. They're asking about where I serve and who I serve. And so in my mind, it's not about what you do as a superintendent, it's how you serve. And I think that for me, when I go to work, I could easily be consumed with 100% of tasks, but I really work hard to make sure, whether it's in my calendar activities or whatever, that I am doing at least 60% in terms of how and service, not the tasks. Tasks, they're not going to go anywhere. I'll handle them and take care of them. And I have a great team. But getting to know students and motivating them and letting them know that they are loved and cared for, and they have an advocate and a champion at any level in the organization. And I spend an inordinate amount of time getting those students by their name, cafeteria workers. It doesn't matter, anybody, because everybody matters. And that is something that we really work on. And I feel like if I can do that as a superintendent, in a fairly large district, then it leaves no excuse for anybody else to be able to do that. And I think that's the most important thing. We hear it all the time. We hear people say, well, what do you remember from school? And a lot of times they don't remember mole conversions in chemistry or the quadratic formula in algebra, but you know what they remember? They remember the person that came up to them after a ball game and said, hey, I know your parents weren't able to make it because they worked 2 jobs, but I'm here for you. That's what they remember. They remember those things. And, the board, I just had a board retreat. One of the board members said, we were walking through the high school and said, I can't believe I didn't even know my superintendent growing up. And all these kids, they come up and they talk to you, they know you by name and you're approachable, but it has taken a lot of time every day over 10, 11 years of serving in this district to do that, to know their brothers and sisters and their parents. And that's something I really work on. And I think it makes a difference. I really believe that. So it allows me to demonstrate how I feel about our students. And I want them to know that they're in a place they're cared for and loved. And all the other stuff, if they know those things, we can put them in the best positions to be successful at that point.
Well, you have inspired me that some of the knowing and loving other people is part of our work every day when we work in education. And so your story has inspired me. I knew a little bit about you, and now I feel like I have been inspired. I want to take my last time before I hand it over to Gary to tell you best wishes as you move forward with the national superintendent. And I just want to tell you, as you represent Texas, your story is gonna make a difference because you've made such a difference in this state and with your district. And I want to just encourage you to have fun, to really enjoy that process because you have earned it. And we have such respect for you, and we thank you and admire you.
Well, that's very kind. I really appreciate that. It means a lot. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. And that last comment you made, about knowing your students' names. And I mean, I think anybody listening in can gain from that, because I think as a society and just as individuals, and whether you're working with public ed or you're working for a company, like it's so easy to get caught up in the tasks that have to get done and forget the relationships that are really the important piece. So I think that's so powerful. And okay, so switching gears a little bit, we're gonna last question. This is kind of like the ice bucket challenge. I need a better analogy than ice bucket challenge. It's kind of like
the polar bear challenge.
Something, right? Who in public ed right now that you know of that has a good story, great story, that is passionate about public ed that we should have on here that you want to give a shout out to come on and share their story?
Have you interviewed LaTanya Goffney yet?
No, as a matter of fact, we have not. She has served on a panel for me at TexEdCon and with me, but no, Gary will never get to talk if we have her on, because I will ask so many questions.
Okay. Well, that would be one that we have a very good relationship.
She's amazing.
Yeah, she has an amazing story. Another person that truly has an amazing story is Roosevelt Nix. I don't know. Nivens. I'm sorry. I don't know if you know him.
Yes.
I don't even know what I just said. Roosevelt Nivens.
Yes, I do know him. Thank you. We haven't had him on either. And he was one of the candidates for superintendent of the year when I served on the committee. And so when I tell you that it was very hard to pick, I love him. And I didn't want to cry, but I'm crying because he is great. So yeah. LaTanya,
Roosevelt, and then Walter Jackson, who's a superintendent at LaPorte. He was in Brennan. He was a finalist in 2019.
That's the year.
But he's Walt and I are in the Holdsworth Academy together with Martha. There's just there's so many great superintendents. There truly is. But those are three that I have a lot of respect for, and I feel like we have a lot of mutual respect for one another, and we know we can and have call on each other at any time. And I just think they do really great things for their communities.
No, appreciate that. So we will have to have them on the podcast, and they can share their story. So very excited about that. And just want to thank you, Dr. Ott, for everything you're doing in public ed. And thank you for coming on the podcast and sharing your story. And before we close out, we want to give one last shout out to our sponsor, I Do Impact. They're providing funding to public ed around the great state of Texas, creating endowments. Every year they're providing funding. So it's not a one-time allotment, and it doesn't involve taxpayers, doesn't involve the government. So reach out to I Do Impact if your district needs funding. And for those of y'all that have been tuning in, stay tuned for future episodes of the Educational Leadership Podcast.